Oftentimes, it seems that consciously or unconsciously, a narrative is reinforced that the opioid crisis impacts only one type of community, that it's limited to people of a certain income, geography, race, culture, et cetera. But the truth is that it impacts all of us. In New York City, Bronx residents die of drug overdoses at a higher rate than any other borough. And for this reason, I would like to submit to the record, and I seek unanimous consent to submit to the record this New York Times article that displays the urgent need for federal opioid response.
Without objection, so ordered.
In urban communities. Thank you very much. I'm concerned that when it comes to truly prioritizing and solving the opioid crisis, the president is saying one thing but doing another. Last month, President Trump declared a, quote, national emergency concerning the southern border of the United States under the National Emergencies Act. And, my colleagues wanted to talk about the southern border with relation to the opioid crisis, so let's talk about it. Because even at the time that he declared this emergency, he said himself, quote, I didn't need to do this. But he did. And at the time the president declared this emergency, the White House issued a statement that, quote, he would be using his legal authority to take executive action to secure additional resources. And he's transferred millions of dollars even from FEMA to ICE. The statement said that the administration had identified funding that could be transferred from other agencies as well. This includes up to $2.5 billion that he's transferred from the Department of Defense and up to $3.6 billion reallocated from military construction projects. So that's one national emergency he's identified. But about a year and a half ago, the president issued a declaration indicating that opioids also constitute a public health emergency. Director Carroll, to date, how much funding has the administration transferred from other agencies to address the opioid public health emergency?
If you're referring to the opioid emergency that was declared 18 months or so ago, very little money was actually transferred over. I'm not sure of the exact amount, but it was not very much money.
Right. We're seeing here, there's evidence that almost no money was transferred from other agencies. So we have two national emergencies, one declared on the southern border where the president transfers and is taking away millions of dollars from other agencies to address a wall, which doesn't even solve these issues when we're seeing that it's focused on ports of entry. But second, when we actually—
May I address that, actually, just to make sure? I think that they were done with two different intents. When the opioid crisis was identified, it was to bring awareness, just like what you were talking about and what you've seen in your community, in your district, to make sure that people, parents, everyone understood the issue.
So we've got two emergencies. One is treated with an actual action, and the other is just to raise awareness. But I do think that despite the fact that I disagree with disagree is a mild term, but disagree with the president's course of action, I do think that we here in Congress have responsibility as well. The Public Health Emergency Fund has only at most $57,000 in it. And it has not been really funded congressionally in a long time. So I think that that's an area where we can accept some personal responsibility. But also it's hard to ignore the private sector's benefit from the opioid crisis. Drug makers have poured close to $2.5 billion into lobbying and funding members of Congress over the last decade. Mr. Carroll, do you believe that private sector lobbying by the pharmaceutical industry could be playing a role in the opioid crisis?
I haven't looked into the lobbying part of this at all. You did mention the public health, and I wanted to just mention something that CDC has done that I think has been very helpful. We've been working with the CDC and DEA to make sure that, just like if there were an outbreak of a contagious disease, when there's an outbreak of overdoses in one cluster area, the HHS through the CDC is working on creating a hot team to deploy immediately to those areas. And through the public health funds, that's one of the things that they're doing. And so I just wanted to mention CDC,
Sure thing.
If there's an outbreak in your district.
So one last question, specifically, perhaps Ms. McNeil or Mr. Carroll, but Ms. McNeil, did the declaration of a public health emergency for opioids make any additional funding available to expand treatment for individuals who had overdosed or to provide services to individuals who were in recovery?
I'd like to invite my colleague, Mary Dennigan-McCauley, to answer that question.
So we did look at the public health emergency declaration that was issued in November 2017 and then subsequent to that. You are correct that the public health emergency funds were not used and that there's $57,000 currently in that.
$57,000 that we have as a government to address the public health emergency in this fund?
That is correct. There are alternative funds that can be used. But in this case, they did not use this, and this emergency has never been used for opioids in the past.
Gentleman, lady's time has expired. Would you explain why that is? No, you. Yes, yes.
I just wanted to point out of the $34 billion that the government spends, half, more or less, and I can play with the statistics, more or less half is devoted to law enforcement, and then the other half, 16 or 17 billion, goes toward treatment and prevention.